This is a message from a viewer named Daniel, and it describes something that doesn't look like a scam at all until you add up the numbers. There's no theft in this story, no forged signatures, no dramatic discovery of secret accounts or missing funds. What Daniel describes is something more insidious, a slow, steady redefinition of marriage from partnership to payment plan, from mutual support to one-way obligation, from love to invoice. What you're about to hear might sound familiar, not because you've experienced it yourself, though you might have, but because it operates on assumptions many of us share. Husbands should provide. Generosity equals love. Questioning money means questioning commitment. These ideas aren't wrong in themselves, but in the wrong hands, they become tools of extraction. If this could happen to Daniel Mercer, a 62-year-old industrial purchasing manager from Ohio, a man who spent his career negotiating contracts and managing budgets, a man who understood exactly how money worked, it can happen to anyone who mistakes open-handedness for partnership and silence for peace. Daniel reached out to me because he wanted other men to understand something that cost him years of his life and hundreds of thousands of dollars to learn, that financial abuse doesn't always look like abuse. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it sounds like expectation. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who says, "If you loved me," every time you try to set a limit. What follows is his account, in his own words. And I have to tell you, this one doesn't have a villain. It has something more troubling, a system of beliefs that turned a marriage into a transaction and called any objection to that transaction a failure of love. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 62 years old, and I need to tell you how my marriage became an expense report and how it took me 2 years to realize that the woman I loved saw me not as a partner but as a payment system. But before I tell you about the bills and the arguments and the slow collapse of my savings, you need to understand who I was when I moved to Thailand. Because I wasn't financially naive. I wasn't a pushover who didn't understand the value of money. I was a professional who had spent 34 years managing industrial purchasing for manufacturing companies. My entire career was about understanding costs, negotiating terms, and making sure money was spent wisely. That expertise didn't protect me. If anything, it made me more vulnerable because I thought I could see a bad deal coming, and I couldn't. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, in a working-class family that taught me the value of a dollar. My father worked at a tire factory. My mother cleaned houses. Nothing was wasted. Everything was earned. By the time I was 12, I had a paper route and understood that money came from work and work came from discipline. I carried those values through my education and into my career. I started as a purchasing clerk at a small manufacturing company and worked my way up over 3 decades to become a senior purchasing manager, handling contracts worth millions of dollars. My job was to get value for every dollar spent, to negotiate with suppliers, to identify hidden costs, to make sure that what we paid for was what we received. I was good at it. My employers valued me for my thoroughness, my attention to detail, my refusal to accept vague terms or undefined obligations. In professional contexts, I had no trouble saying, "This doesn't work for me," or "We need to renegotiate these terms." But in personal contexts, in relationships, I was different. I didn't like conflict. I wanted to be generous, to be seen as someone who took care of the people he loved. I had internalized the idea that a good man provides, that questioning costs was petty, that love and money shouldn't be discussed in the same conversation. Those beliefs would cost me dearly. I married young 23 to my college sweetheart, Sarah. We were together for 18 years before things fell apart. No dramatic betrayal. We just grew into different people who wanted different things. She wanted adventure. I wanted stability. She wanted to travel the world. I wanted to build something lasting. We divorced when I was 41, split our assets fairly, and went our separate ways. We never had children. That was a joint decision we made early and never revisited. Sometimes I wonder if things would have been different with kids in the picture. But there's no way to know, and no point in speculation. After the divorce, I focused on work. I dated occasionally, but nothing serious developed. I became comfortable with solitude in a way that some people find sad, but that I found peaceful. I had my routines. I had my savings. I had a clear path toward retirement. By 60, I had accumulated substantial resources. I sold my house in Ohio for $480,000. My savings and investments totaled another $210,000. My Social Security and pension together provided $2,500 monthly. I was, by any reasonable standard, set for a comfortable retirement. But Ohio winters were getting harder to bear. The cost of living kept climbing. And there was a loneliness that I had learned to live with, but never truly accepted a sense that my remaining years would be spent alone, waiting for an ending that held no particular promise. Thailand appeared in my research as an option I hadn't considered. The climate, the cost of living, the possibility of stretching my resources further than they would go in the United States. I did my due diligence spreadsheets, comparing costs, forums, discussing expat life, conversations with Americans who had made the move. The numbers made sense. And so, at 60, I packed what mattered and flew to Bangkok to start a new chapter. I wasn't looking for a wife. I wasn't even looking for a relationship, but I found Kay. I met Sukanya Ratanachai, everyone called her Kay, through a group of expats and Thai professionals who gathered monthly for dinner at a restaurant in the Sathorn district. A retired engineer I'd connected with online invited me to join, and I went looking for social connection, not romance. Kay was there as a friend of one of the Thai members, 33 years old, working in retail management at a department store, confident in a way that I found refreshing. She spoke English, well, not perfectly, but clearly enough that our conversations flowed without the awkwardness I'd experienced with some Thai women whose language skills created constant barriers. What struck me most was her directness. She didn't play games. She didn't pretend to be interested in things she wasn't. When I asked about her background, she told me plainly she was from Chaya Phum, a province in the Aizen region. Her family was poor farmers who struggled with debt and bad harvests. She had come to Bangkok at 20 to find better opportunities and had worked her way up from shop assistant to her current management position. I don't like secrets, she told me during that first dinner. Life is easier when people say what they mean. That resonated with me. My first marriage had suffered from too many unspoken expectations. Too many assumptions that were never examined until they exploded. The idea of a relationship built on explicit communication appealed to everything I valued. We exchanged numbers. We met for coffee, then dinner, then more dinners. Kay was clear about her cultural expectations from early in our relationship. In Thailand, she explained one evening, husbands take care of wives. That's respect. That's how families work. I understood what she was saying. I had read about Thai culture and the expectations around marriage, the sin sod, the family support, the assumption that foreign husbands would provide stability. None of this was hidden. Kay wasn't pretending to want something she didn't want. I agree, I said. I believe in taking care of people I love. And I did believe that. I was raised to believe that men should provide, should protect, should ensure that their families had what they needed. The idea that I would marry someone and then nickel and dime every expense seemed petty to me, small, not the kind of man I wanted to be. We dated for a year. The relationship progressed, naturally dinners, weekend trips, gradually increasing intimacy and commitment. Kai met my expat friends. I met her family during a trip to Chaya Phum. Everything felt orderly, intentional. Two adults building something together with their eyes open. I proposed. She accepted. We married in a simple ceremony in Bangkok with a modest sin sod payment that her family seemed genuinely grateful for. At first, the financial arrangements were exactly what I expected. I paid the rent on our apartment. I covered utilities. I bought groceries. Kay contributed her salary to household expenses and personal costs. It was a partnership not equal in terms of raw numbers, given our different incomes, but balanced in terms of effort and intention. I thought I understood the deal. I was the primary provider. She was contributing what she could. I didn't understand that the deal was about to change. The shift happened gradually, which is how these things always work. No one announces on day one that they expect you to pay for everything. The expectations expand incrementally, each step seeming like a small, reasonable extension of what came before. It started with her phone. "My phone is old," Kay said one evening, about 4 months into our marriage. "It keeps crashing. I need to get a new one." "Okay," I said. "What are you thinking of getting?" "There's a new Samsung that's really good. But it's expensive. How expensive? About 30,000 baht. That was roughly $900. A significant purchase, but not outrageous for a good smartphone. Can you afford it? I asked. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I thought maybe you could help. Help was the word. Not buy for me. Not pay for. Help. As if we were splitting the cost, sharing the burden. But that's not what she meant. When I suggested we could each pay half, she seemed confused. But you have more money than me, she said. Why should I pay half for something I need? It was a reasonable point, viewed from a certain angle. I did have more money. The phone was necessary, not a luxury. What kind of husband makes his wife pay for necessities when he has the resources to cover them? I bought the phone. The next month, it was her car payment. Kay had a small Honda that she'd purchased before our marriage. With a loan she was still paying off. The monthly payment was about 8,000 baht, around $240. I'm having trouble making my car payment this month, she told me. Work has been slow. Can you cover it? Again, reasonable. Things were tight. I could help. That's what partners do. I made the payment, and then I made the next one, and the one after that. At some point, without any formal discussion, Kay's car payment became my responsibility. Then it was beauty treatments. Kay had always taken care of her appearance. That was one of the things I appreciated about her. But the treatments had previously been funded from her own income. Now they started appearing on my mental ledger of monthly expenses. I'm getting my hair done tomorrow. Okay, it's expensive though. 6,000 baht. The implication was clear. I was expected to pay. And I did, because by this point the pattern had been established. My money was our money. Her money was her money. The credit card was the clearest signal that I was now funding her entire life. Kay had a credit card with a modest limit that she'd used for occasional purchases. One evening, she told me the balance had gotten higher than she could pay off. How much? I asked. 40,000 baht. $1,200. More than her entire monthly salary. How did that happen? Things add up. I needed clothes for work. There were gifts for my family. Some emergencies. I paid off the credit card, and I told myself that this was a one-time thing, that she would be more careful going forward. She wasn't more careful. The credit card balance crept up again over the following months. And when it did, the expectation was clear. I would take care of it. That's when Kay said the words that crystallized the new reality of our marriage. If we're married, why should I pay anything? After that conversation, any pretense of shared financial responsibility disappeared. Kay stopped contributing to household expenses entirely. Her salary, whatever remained after the credit card minimum she occasionally paid, was hers to spend as she wanted. My income and savings were ours, meaning they funded everything. The monthly outflow was staggering when I finally sat down to calculate it. Rent for our apartment, 50,000 baht, about $1,500. Utilities, internet, phone plans, 8,000 baht, about $240. Groceries and household supplies, 20,000 baht, about $600. Kay's car payment and insurance, 12,000 baht, about $360. Kay's personal expenses, beauty treatments, clothing, entertainment, 30,000 baht, about $900. Family support to Eisen, monthly transfers to her parents, plus additional requests for siblings and relatives, 40,000 baht, about $1,200. Miscellaneous credit card payoffs, unexpected emergencies, gifts and obligations I hadn't anticipated, variable, but averaging another 20 to 30,000 baht monthly. Total monthly outflow, approximately 180 to 200,000 baht, roughly $5,000 to $6,000. My monthly income from Social Security and pension was $2,500. The math was simple and devastating. I was spending more than double what I earned. The difference came from my savings, the nest egg I had accumulated over 30 years of careful living, the money that was supposed to fund my retirement, the cushion that meant I would never be dependent on anyone else. Every month, that cushion got thinner. I knew this was happening. I tracked my finances obsessively, old habits from my purchasing career. I could see the numbers declining. I could calculate exactly how long my savings would last at the current burn rate. But knowing and acting are different things. And every time I tried to address the situation, I ran into something harder to fight than numbers: emotion. Kay never yelled. She never threatened. She never said, "Give me money or else." Her approach was more sophisticated than that, and more effective. She used language. When I suggested we needed to create a budget and stick to it, she said, "You're embarrassing me. Do you want people to think you can't take care of your wife?" When I pointed out that her personal spending had increased significantly, she said, "Other husbands don't complain about their wives buying nice things. Why are you so different?" When I expressed concern about the rate at which our savings were declining, she said, "Why did you marry me if you were going to be cheap? I thought you wanted to take care of me." Every financial discussion became a referendum on my character. Not on whether the expenses were reasonable, on whether I was a good enough man, a loving enough husband, a sufficiently generous provider. The word cheap came up constantly. It was her weapon of choice, a word that carried moral judgment, that suggested smallness of spirit rather than prudent financial management. "You're being cheap about this. I don't want to be married to a cheap man. Cheap men don't deserve good wives." I had spent my entire career being careful with money. That carefulness had built my savings, secured my retirement, given me the freedom to move to Thailand in the first place. But in the context of my marriage, that same quality was being recast as a moral failing. And the most effective weapon of all was the phrase, I came to dread. If you loved me, you wouldn't complain about supporting my family. If you loved me, you'd want me to have nice things. If you loved me, you wouldn't make me feel guilty for spending money. Love and money had become fused in Kay's framework. Any concern about expenses was evidence of insufficient love. Any attempt to set boundaries was proof that I didn't care about her the way a husband should. I found myself backing down from conversations I knew I needed to have. I found myself approving expenses I knew we couldn't afford. I found myself apologizing for raising legitimate concerns about our financial future. Money had become moral, and disagreement had become betrayal. The support payments to Kay's family and Eisen were a separate category of drain, one that came with its own emotional leverage. From the beginning of our relationship, I had understood that helping Kay's family was part of the package. Thai culture emphasized filial duty. Daughters were expected to support their parents. When a Thai woman married a foreign man with resources, that support was expected to increase. I had accepted this. I had budgeted for it. The initial payments were modest, 15,000 baht monthly, about $450, and they went to genuinely helpful purposes. Medical care for her aging parents, repairs on the family home, support during the agricultural off-season. But like everything else, the family support expanded. Her younger brother needed money to start a small business, 50,000 baht. Her sister needed help with school fees for her children, 20,000 baht. Her parents' roof was leaking and needed replacement, 80,000 baht. There was a cousin's wedding, a funeral, an uncle's medical emergency, a crisis with the family's rice harvest. Every few weeks, there was a new request. Each one was framed as temporary, urgent, and essential. Each one came with emotional pressure that made refusal feel cruel. My father is sick. You want me to just let him suffer? My sister's children can't go to school without uniforms. Is that fair to them? The family is counting on us. They don't have anyone else. I became the solution to every problem her extended family encountered. My savings became their safety net. And Kay mediated all of these transactions, presenting each request with just enough emotional context to make saying no feel monstrous. The worst part was that I couldn't verify any of it. I didn't speak Thai well enough to communicate directly with her family. I had to take Kay's word for what was needed and why. And while some requests were clearly legitimate, I had met her parents. I had seen their modest circumstances. I had no way to know if every emergency was real or if the amounts requested were inflated. I started to suspect that I was being played, but suspicion is different from proof. And Kay's emotional responses to any questioning were so intense that I learned to simply pay and move on. You don't trust me, she would say, tears in her eyes. You think I'm lying about my own family. What could I say to that? Either I trusted her or I didn't. Either I was a good husband who supported his wife's family, or I was a suspicious cheapskate who questioned everything. I chose to trust. Again and again, I chose to trust. And my savings continued to bleed. About 18 months into our marriage, I sat Kay down for a serious conversation about our finances. I had prepared for this discussion carefully. I had printed out bank statements and spreadsheets. I had calculated exactly how much we were spending and how much we had left. I had projected forward to show when we would run out of money if things continued as they were. The numbers were stark. At our current rate of spending, we had approximately 3 years before my savings were exhausted completely. After that, we would be living on my $2,500 monthly income, barely enough to cover rent, let alone everything else. I showed Kay the documents. I walked her through the projections. I explained, calmly and rationally, that we needed to reduce our spending significantly or face a very difficult future. She looked at the papers. She nodded occasionally. She seemed to be listening. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that revealed, more clearly than anything else, how fundamentally different our understandings of our situation were. "You worry too much. Money comes back." I stared at her. "What do you mean money comes back?" "You're always worried about money. But money comes back. You'll figure it out. You always have good luck." This isn't about luck. This is about math. Look at these numbers. We're spending more than we have. Maybe you can do some work. Consulting. Something. I'm retired. That's the whole point. I'm not supposed to need to work anymore. She shrugged. Then we'll be fine. You're smart. You'll make it work. That was the end of the conversation. She got up to make dinner, and I sat alone with my spreadsheets, realizing that I had just shown my wife proof of our impending financial disaster, and she had responded with magical thinking. Money comes back. As if savings were a natural resource that replenished itself. As if the laws of arithmetic didn't apply to our household. As if my concerns were simply a character flaw, excessive worry, insufficient faith rather than a reasonable response to objective reality. That sentence scared me more than any argument could have, because it meant that Kay didn't just disagree with me about our spending. She lived in a different financial universe entirely, one where resources were infinite, where consequences didn't exist, where my job was to produce money and her job was to spend it without limit. There was no partnership here. There never had been. Over the following weeks, I thought carefully about my situation. I wasn't angry at Kay. Anger would have been easier. It would have given me clarity and energy and a clear sense of who the enemy was. Instead, I felt something more complicated. A dawning recognition that we had never actually agreed on what our marriage was. For me, marriage meant partnership. Two people working together toward shared goals, both contributing what they could, both concerned about the well-being of the family unit, both willing to make sacrifices when necessary. For Kay, marriage meant provision. A husband who had resources was expected to deploy those resources for his wife and her family. His job was to earn or provide. Her job was to spend and direct. Questioning the spending was questioning the fundamental arrangement. Setting limits was refusing to fulfill his role. I don't think Kay was trying to scam me in the traditional sense. I don't think she sat down and calculated how to extract money from a gullible foreigner. She was operating according to a set of cultural assumptions that were genuinely held assumptions about marriage, about gender roles, about what it meant to be a good husband. The problem was that her assumptions and mine were incompatible, and I had spent 18 months trying to make an incompatible relationship work by giving more, by questioning less, by silencing my own concerns in the name of peace. There was no shared budget in our marriage. No ceiling on expenses, no future plan that took into account the finite nature of my resources. There was only expectation. Her expectation that I would provide whatever was needed. My expectation that she would eventually understand reality. One of those expectations was going to lose, and I finally understood that if I didn't change something, the loser would be me. I wasn't a partner in this marriage. I was a payment system. The decision to leave didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It accumulated gradually, like the expenses that had drained my savings. It started with acceptance. I accepted that Kay was not going to change. Her beliefs about marriage and money were deeply held and culturally reinforced. No amount of spreadsheets or logical arguments was going to shift her fundamental worldview. It continued with arithmetic. I calculated what would happen if I stayed versus what would happen if I left. Staying meant financial ruin a certainty, given current trajectories. Leaving meant preserving what remained of my savings and rebuilding something sustainable with my monthly income alone. It concluded with self-respect. I asked myself what kind of life I was living and whether it was the life I wanted. The answer was no. I didn't want to spend my remaining years as a financial resource, constantly pressured and perpetually depleted. I wanted peace. I wanted stability. I wanted the retirement I had worked for, not one defined by someone else's unlimited expectations. Once I reached that conclusion, I began to plan. I didn't announce my intentions. I had learned that conversations with Kay about money went nowhere. Telling her I was planning to leave would only trigger emotional manipulation designed to keep me in place long enough to extract more resources. Instead, I acted quietly. I separated our finances as much as possible. I moved money from the Thai accounts Kay had access to into American accounts she didn't. I documented what I had spent during our marriage, not for legal purposes, but for my own understanding of what had happened. I stopped the family payments to Eisen. This was the hardest part, because I knew it would cause immediate distress, but I couldn't keep funding a bottomless pit while planning my exit. The payments had to stop. I found a short-term rental, a small service department I could move into while arrangements were finalized. I packed essential belongings gradually, taking things to the new place in small increments so the accumulating absence wouldn't be noticed. I consulted a lawyer about divorce procedures in Thailand. The process was relatively straightforward for foreigners without children or shared property. We hadn't purchased any assets together. Everything was either in my name or hers. The separation could be clean if both parties agreed. I prepared for the conversation I had been dreading. I told Kay on a Sunday evening I had chosen the time deliberately, a quiet night. No plans, nothing that would force us to be together afterward. I wanted to say what I needed to say and then have space to process the aftermath. She was watching television when I sat down across from her. "We need to talk." She looked up, registered something in my expression, and muted the TV. "What's wrong?" "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air between us. Kay's face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, the beginning of something that might have been anger before settling into a careful blankness. "Why?" "Because our marriage isn't working. For me, anyway. We want different things. We understand money differently. I can't keep living the way we've been living." "This is about money? You're ending our marriage over money?" "I'm ending our marriage because I've been treated as a payment system instead of a partner. Because every conversation about spending ended with you calling me cheap or suggesting I didn't love you enough. Because you looked at proof that we were heading toward financial disaster and told me money comes back. So I was supposed to just live poor? Not have nice things? Not help my family? You were supposed to live within our means. Our means. Not just mine. But there never was an our, was there? There was your money and my money. And my money was supposed to cover everything." She was quiet for a moment. I could see her calculating, figuring out her next move. What angle might work to keep the situation going? "What if we made a budget? Like you wanted? What if I started contributing more?" "It's too late for that. I've been trying to have that conversation for over a year. You weren't interested then. I don't believe you'd be interested now, not really, not once the crisis passed. So you're just giving up." "I'm protecting myself, something I should have done a long time ago." Kay's expression shifted then. The mask of confusion and hurt dropped away, replaced by something harder, something that looked almost like contempt. "I thought you were a real man," she said. I had expected manipulation. I had expected tears. I had expected accusations and arguments and the full arsenal of emotional weapons she had deployed throughout our marriage. But that sentence, "I thought you were a real man," cut deepest precisely because it revealed her true framework. A real man would keep paying. A real man wouldn't question. A real man would sacrifice his entire future to maintain her lifestyle and support her family. A real man, in her view, was a resource that never set boundaries. "I thought marriage meant limits," I replied. "I was wrong about you. You were wrong about me. We should end this before we're both worse off." I got up to leave. She didn't try to stop me. The divorce proceedings were simpler than I'd feared. Kay, having realized that the flow of money had definitively stopped, had little incentive to drag things out. Fighting the divorce would cost her money she didn't have and time she couldn't bill to me. Better to accept the ending and move on to whatever came next. We agreed to terms through our respective lawyers. She would keep what was in her name, the car, her personal belongings, whatever remained in her Thai bank accounts. I would keep what was in mine. The apartment lease was in my name, so I had the option to keep it or terminate. I chose to terminate, having no desire to stay in a space filled with memories of a failed marriage. There was no claim for ongoing support. Thai divorce law didn't automatically require alimony, especially in short marriages without children. Kay's lawyer raised the possibility, but my lawyer pointed out that Kay was employed, had no dependents, and that I had already spent substantial sums supporting her during the marriage. The claim went nowhere. The final papers were signed 6 weeks after our initial conversation. 2 years of marriage ended with signatures and stamps. I felt many things watching Kay sign those documents. Relief, primarily. Sadness, unexpectedly. Not for the end of the marriage, I was genuinely glad that was over, but for the waste of it, the time, the money. The hopes I had carried into Thailand about building something meaningful in my final decades. All of it, gone, but I was free. After the divorce was finalized, I sat down and did what I do best. I calculated the damage. The numbers were brutal. During my 2-year marriage to Kay, I had spent approximately $270,000. This included living expenses, her personal costs, family support payments, emergency extractions, and all the miscellaneous drains that had accumulated over 24 months. I had arrived in Thailand with $690,000 in total assets, the sale of my house, plus my savings and investments. I left my marriage with approximately $420,000. That meant I had lost $270,000 in 2 years, more than a third of my net worth on a marriage that never was what I thought it was. The monthly math was even more striking. I had burned an average of over $11,000 per month during my marriage. My income was $2,500. The difference, more than $8,000 monthly, had come from my savings. If I had continued at that rate for another 3 years, I would have been broke. Completely broke. Living on my Social Security alone in a country where my visa status depended on having financial resources. The divorce had cost me additional legal fees, about $8,000, but that expense had saved me from losing everything else. I had dodged a catastrophe. Barely. I've had over a year to think about what happened, to analyze my marriage the way I would analyze a failed procurement project, looking for the points of failure and the lessons to be learned. The first lesson is that cultural differences around money aren't just differences in practice, they're differences in fundamental assumptions. Kay and I weren't just disagreeing about how much to spend. We were operating from completely different understandings of what marriage meant, what husbands owed, what wives were entitled to, what providing looked like in practice. Those differences were visible from the beginning, if I had been willing to see them. In Thailand, husbands take care of wives. That's respect. She told me exactly what she believed. I heard the words, but didn't understand their implications. I thought taking care meant partnership with me providing more. She thought it meant unconditional support with no limits whatsoever. The second lesson is that emotional leverage is a powerful tool for financial extraction. Kay rarely asked for money directly. Instead, she created contexts in which refusing to provide was characterized as moral failure. If you loved me, you're being cheap. Other husbands don't complain. These phrases turned financial discussions into character judgments. Every boundary I tried to set became evidence that I wasn't a good enough man. I had no defense against this kind of pressure. My whole identity as a provider, as a generous person, as a good husband, was being used against me. To protect my finances, I had to be willing to be called cheap, to be accused of insufficient love, to feel like a failure. And I wasn't willing, not for too long. The third lesson is that loving someone doesn't mean accepting unlimited obligation. I genuinely cared about Kay. I wanted her to be happy. I wanted to build something good with her. But caring about someone doesn't require bankrupting yourself to meet their unlimited expectations. Love is not a blank check. Marriage is not an unconditional promise to fund whatever your partner wants, without question. I had been taught, somewhere deep in my upbringing, that questioning money in relationships was petty, that love should transcend financial concerns, that good men provide without complaint. Those teachings nearly destroyed me. They're not wisdom, they're vulnerabilities that certain people know how to exploit. The fourth lesson is that saying no is not the same as failing. Every time I tried to set a limit with Kay, she framed my refusal as inadequacy. I wasn't being responsible. I was being cheap. I wasn't protecting our future. I was failing to love her enough. The language made it feel like every boundary was a betrayal. But saying no isn't failure. It's survival. It's recognizing that resources are finite and that unlimited demands will eventually destroy whoever is trying to meet them. The failure wasn't in saying no, the failure was in taking 2 years to start saying it. 3 months after my divorce was finalized, I returned to the United States. Not because I had to, I still had resources and a valid visa. But I needed distance. I needed to be somewhere that wasn't associated with my failed marriage. I needed to rediscover who I was as an individual, not as half of a dysfunctional couple. I stayed with my sister in Cincinnati for a while. Then I rented a small apartment in a town I'd never lived in before, a place with no memories, no history, no associations with any period of my life. I lived quietly. I walked. I read. I rebuilt my routines around my reduced circumstances. $2,500 a month went further in small-town Ohio than it had in Bangkok, especially when I was the only one spending it. The loneliness I had fled to Thailand to escape was still there. But it felt different now, cleaner somehow. Not the loneliness of waiting for someone to make demands on me, but the solitude of someone who had chosen peace over chaos. I'm 62. I have maybe 20 years left if I'm lucky. I'll spend those years carefully now, with the awareness that generosity without boundaries is just vulnerability. I don't regret going to Thailand. I don't even entirely regret marrying Kay, though that regret is complicated. What I regret is not understanding sooner what I was dealing with. Not setting limits when limits were needed. Not trusting my own judgment when my judgment was telling me something was wrong. The scam wasn't stealing money. It was redefining love as obligation and calling boundaries disrespect. Once I saw that clearly, I was able to leave. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. I think about Kay sometimes. Not with anger that faded months ago. Not with longing the woman I thought I loved never really existed. Just with a kind of weary curiosity. Is she with someone else now? Has she found another man to fund her lifestyle and support her family? Is she running the same playbook, the emotional leverage, the accusations of cheapness, the if you loved me manipulations? Probably. These patterns tend to repeat. And somewhere, another man is experiencing what I experienced. Someone who thinks he's being a good husband by meeting every demand. Someone who's watching his savings disappear but can't bring himself to say no. Someone who's being called cheap and controlling for trying to protect his own future. I wish I could reach that man. I wish I could show him my spreadsheets, walk him through the numbers, help him see what took me 2 years to understand. But I know from experience that people don't change until they're ready to change. You can show someone proof of their own destruction, and they'll tell you, money comes back. You can explain the math in perfect detail, and they'll accuse you of worrying too much. Until someone is ready to see, they won't see. All I can do is tell my story and hope that someone recognizes themselves in it. Hope that someone hearing this decides to run the numbers on their own situation. Hope that someone finds the courage to set a boundary before it's too late. If you're watching this, and you're in a marriage where your financial concerns are dismissed as character flaws, where setting limits is called cheap, where if you loved me is the answer to every question about money, I want you to know something. Your concerns are valid. Your desire for limits is not a failure to love. And the person calling you cheap for trying to protect your future is not operating in your best interest. Once bills replace affection, the relationship is already over. It's just a matter of whether you recognize that before or after you've lost everything. I recognized it late, but not too late. I hope you're luckier than I was. My name is Daniel Mercer, and this is my warning to you. If Daniel's story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own financial situation, or about someone you know who might be slowly drowning in obligations, they never agreed to please share this video. Somewhere out there, another person is being called cheap for trying to survive, being told that love means unlimited spending, being pressured to sacrifice their future for someone else's unlimited expectations. Maybe hearing this will help them trust their own judgment. And if you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to this channel, because these stories need to be told, the ones without villains. The ones where the trap is made of expectations and the prison is made of your own desire to be a good partner. Until next time, stay safe out there.